You've led counter-terrorism firearms units where a margin of error can often mean the loss of human life. You protect the NFL where a mistake means a global broadcast could shut down and go dark. But you've also faced some incredibly challenging health issues, earlier in the stroke and more recently successfully fought stage 3 cancer.
This is quite a rare, raw condition of mine, which I've never really spoken about fully. And I think what it's taught me is losing control of your own body. It moves away from being this whole prevention thing that you're working on.
You previously stated that over-optimization for prevention is under-preparing for recovery. So why is spending millions on a 50-foot wall actually making an organisation fundamentally less safe?
Perception creates confidence. Nothing wrong with having that confidence, but we've created that complacency.
Risk appetite, risk tolerance, risk acceptance. How do you force boards to align their actual risk appetite with mathematical realities that, of course, they're going to be breached?
And that's the true reality of it. The metrics driven by cost, by composure, that's going to really drive the board to understand a bit more in terms of clarity.
When everything appears to be broken, networks are down, boards are panicking, the illusion of control is seemingly gone. What actually matters?
People. I don't even think twice about that. They're going to help you, because what that would do is it would slow down that whole approach. Otherwise, things could escalate dramatically, quickly, and we will make the wrong decision as a leader. And I don't think that's a fair place to be.
Before we drop into today's masterclass, I want to give everyone a quick heads up. There's a £300 billion cybersecurity market, and we know it's rigged. You're paying a complexity tax that shouldn't exist, and whether that means losing 20 hours a month to a manual grind or bleeding £15,000 plus per hire in agency leakage, we're finally unblocking it. Make sure you stick around to the absolute end of this episode for an exclusive announcement and a private access code that changes how you build your career and your team. Okay, let's get into it. If you're exhausted by the boardroom theatre, the corporate marketing, the constant anxiety that you're just one missed alert away from a catastrophic failure, you're in exactly the right place. Welcome to the Secure Cyber Connect podcast with Jay Adamson and Warren Atkinson. This is one of our latest Cyber Leaders Summit special editions. This coming April in London, we're going to be sitting down with the architects of the industry to bridge the gap between high-level technology and the human beings who are actually running it. Today, we're speaking directly to you, whether you're a CISO trying to manage a board's expectations or an analyst drowning in the where's Wally noise of 10,000 meaningless alerts. This episode's going to be your reality check. Our guest on this episode is Cam Karaji, Director of Cybersecurity and Risk Management for the National Football League, responsible for protecting global, high-visibility ops and converged cyber-physical environments. A former senior counter-terrorism commander, he's led environments where decisions carry immediate life or death stakes. Cam now speaks internationally on resilience, crisis leadership, and the human core of cybersecurity. His work bridges operational discipline with executive strategy in moments that demand composure. Over the next hour, Cam's going to be dismantling the illusion of control. We're going to challenge why the millions you're spending on prevention might actually be making your organisation less safe. And we're going to look at what happens when a digital failure creates a physical crisis in a stadium of 80,000 people. We're also going to get profoundly human. Cam is kindly going to share with us what surviving a stroke and fighting stage 3 cancer has taught him about true resilience and how to reboot your mind when the system completely breaks. We aren't here for a standard polished keynote. We're here for hard, unfiltered truth. So Cam, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you, Jay. I really appreciate it. Given the opportunity after quite some time to arrange it. So really appreciate it.
So look, we'll kick things off really with maybe a bit of insight into your own sort of situation and some personal sort of stuff. You've led counter-terrorism firearms units where a margin of error can often mean the loss of human life. You protect the NFL where a mistake means a global broadcast could shut down and go dark. But you've also faced some incredibly challenging health issues, as touched on earlier, in the form of a stroke, and more recently successfully fought stage 3 cancer. What's terrified you more? Losing control of a global network or losing control of your own body? What did confronting your own mortality teach you about the absolute illusion of control in leadership?
I genuinely do think, this is quite new to me. This is quite a rare, raw condition of mine, which I've never really spoken about fully. And I think what it's taught me is losing control of your own body. It moves away from being this whole prevention thing that you're working on. You can do everything you can to protect yourself, to make yourself healthy, to go to the gym, exercise, have a clean diet. But that whole experience gets stripped away in a second, in a day, in an hour. And I think it's taught me something I carry into my current life, which is what matters to me and what matters now is composure under chaos, composure under crisis. The moment you lose clarity, I think you lose everything. And I think for me, I try to have that clarity at front and center of my mind. So I think there was a bit of a turning point for me initially when those kind of questions really hit to you, having a stroke where you can barely know how to pick up your spoon or barely be able to walk or talk, to then going through that. And when it initially hits you, that's when it is that whole chaos hits you within that 30 seconds. And it's that 30 seconds where it makes you stronger, or it makes you cry. And I've been in that whole composure part fully with not only the stroke but with the cancer as well.
I appreciate you sharing, Cam, and and using a somewhat of an analogy. When you found that your body had sort of failed you in this way, you couldn't firewall the cancer, you had to survive the breach. How did that sort of physical reality completely rewrite your playbook? For maybe the job you do in digital security.
Because in security, we always look at that perimeter, protecting that perimeter, preventing that perimeter from being breached. But for me, that you kind of hit it quite well with the playbook thing, because it turned out that your own life is a playbook, and that was the hardest part. Because for me, there was no perimeter to breach. For me, I thought I was healthy. I did everything to protect myself, keep myself strong mentally and physically as well. But when the real question does strike, then when it does happen, can we function? Can you think? Can you respond? And that is moving my mental credibility from being what I was going through, and mine is going through from a prevention phase to a survivability phase. And I think that today that is everything to me now, here and now as well, because I'm surviving it. But are we in the green fully? No, because I think my whole work life is that survivability. We moved that into my cyber thing, away from it being in counterterrorism where preparedness was everything. You prepare for those kind of incidents. You prepare to go to a 999 call. You prepare to go to an emergency. But when you actually are there, it's a fight or flight scenario. And I think I've kind of found myself in that same scenario all the time. Do we fight it? If you have the ability to do so, great. Do we move away from it because we generally want to survive? And I think the cancer, the stroke has taught me that this whole fight or flight business is moving away from prevention to actually survivability, I think.
And when you touched on this a little already, but when did you sort of realize how imperative composure plays a part in this. Really kind of surviving that physiological crisis. And the way that composure can be obviously plays out in a cyber breach. How important is that?
Because I think when we look, I always look at this analogy of this castle with a fort. And when you look at it from that perspective, why were forts built? To actually reduce the susceptibility of getting, protecting your crown jewels, which was the center of that crown, that turret, that castle, or whatever you want to call it. I think for me, that whole environment collapses. When that environment collapses and you've assumed breach, whether that's a cyber breach, whether that's a personal piece or not, I think you move into this place of working out pressure, working out uncertainty times, and working through a chaos at that moment in time. What's going to drive you forward? And I think for me, it's not technical capability, it's not personal capability, but it's more mental clarity. Do you know where you want to get to and why you want to get to that? And that's why I think we move composure into this facet of moving away from a controlled prevention to controlled mechanisms, I think. So creates that clarity field for us.
Well, it's inspirational stuff, Cam, and thank you very much for sharing that with us.
No, we do appreciate that. And so one further question, just to follow up what you and Jay have just briefly discussed, in terms of obviously your diagnosis, for instance, and identifying that, is there anything you could shed a light on to our listeners perhaps that are going for a similar, obviously traumatic time, for instance, or even plucking up the courage to go into the doctor? Is there anything that you can sort of impart to our listeners?
Yeah, and thank you for that question, Warren, because I think that's a question sometimes you don't see when you're going through it in the midst of going through it, if that makes any sense. And like I said to Jay, I think when that first initial the noise hits you first and saying that you've got cancer or you're going through a stroke, because your body is actually going through it, you can't control that. That is a very challenging part. That first couple of minutes, that first couple of hours is difficult. I'm not gonna lie, but I think one thing was I needed to show vulnerability. Going to see the doctor, putting up that red flag to say give up. Is it too soon to give up? Absolutely not. But can you at least show that vulnerability and go to see your doctor or go and see a medical professional that will help you and guide you through it? For me, the doctors and the NHS have been great because they helped me treat me as a patient. Fantastic. But what I've not said openly and concisely is that alongside those medical elements and the medical treatments I was going through, there has been a big part that played on from the stability I have in with my family at home, that personal safety net being there, always there, that if I needed to fall, there's someone that can catch me and I know they're there. But the other part was going through counseling. Counseling really helped because I was able to talk to a complete stranger on why I felt the way I did feel. And that gave me clarity, because sometimes that's all you need. Just talk to someone to say, well, actually, is it wrong for me to be vulnerable? Yes or no? And I think we go through those emotion phases, and that created the clarity, not the fact that I'm just saying, here's a red flag, give up, now what?
I appreciate you sharing. And I think one thing that certainly resonates from my personal experience with family members and friends is when you do go into the doctors, you're giving your family members that assurance, that peace of mind that you're moving in the right direction. Because as you mentioned, we've all got that imposter syndrome. We've all got that doubt. We don't want to waste people's time, for instance, but you're doing it for your family, your friends, and of course, your team and yourself, more importantly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that was I think that was a tough question, Warren, and something that you don't openly talk about. But yeah, I think it does help. Every facet does help.
No, I appreciate you sharing, and I hope that inspires one of our listeners that are perhaps going through a similar journey. But look, as we shift gears, let's talk about boardroom fear and the prevention trap. One thing I often ask security leaders, and I ask them for an honest response on this, have they been lying to their boards? What's your perspective on that?
I think lying is such a difficult term to kind of get grip of, right? And I don't think we're lying not intentionally, right? But we're managing perception rather than reality. So, when the board asks me, are we secure? We often mean, have we reduced the risk, right? But to be absolutely honest, the breach is going to be inevitable. It will happen, right? So the gap is honesty. We need to move away from the reassurance phase where you keep on giving them a safety net. They spend so much money and tools, your strategy, your way forward. But managing perception is that that element of being say, well, actually, let's create the reality behind that. This is what reassurance looks like, and the reality is X. And the only way I've been able to show that reality is by having metrics to drive that, not just my thoughts, not just what I see, but core metrics that will help them understand, okay, this is really good. This is a problem. Why is it still a problem? And that's the way the board will move away that perception field, I think.
No, I appreciate you sharing. And you've previously stated that over-optimization for prevention is under preparing for recovery. So why is spending millions on a 50-foot wall actually making an organisation fundamentally less safe?
Because with the 50-foot wall, you're creating confidence. It helps that perception piece, right? Because we've done that. And I'd start on that same analogy of that fort tower protecting the crown jewels in that castle, right? So, but what happens is when we create that confidence, we also are driving complacency. And that confidence also helps triage that perception piece, because we're now creating this perception that all our members of staff are safe and secure. Yes, they are. And they more than 90% that they will be. But if they're getting complacent in that confidence perception, then guess what? It's going to be that human person that probably clicks that button at the wrong time. And we've always said, if you look at the issues that we've had all of last year, we've had supply chain problems, we've had deep fakes, we've had issues there, but the main thing was the human firewall. It's that human person that had that confidence that, well, actually, I'm safe, I'm okay, I'll press that button anyway. And that caused that whole triage of chaos and incident, right? And I think we're over investing in prevention. We move away from prevention because that creates a fragile workforce. It creates this perception of confidence, and we need to move away from that phase into more of a resilience phase. When it actually happens, will the control disappear or not? Or can we still have control? So I think perception creates confidence. Nothing wrong with having that confidence, but we've created that complacency, which causes a really fragile workforce, really.
And for our audience that perhaps aren't familiar with risk appetite, risk tolerance, risk acceptance, how do you force boards to align their actual risk appetite with mathematical realities that of course they're going to be breached? Can you help define what that looks like in terms of the appetite versus tolerance and acceptance, and to obviously the point of the question?
I think risk is a common language in any organization. Absolutely. We have a risk. How do we mitigate that risk? Do we accept it? Do we transfer it? Do we mitigate it? Now, or do we just accept it? Now, that whole phase of risk and that language of risk, we always look at almost like a risk register, a risk log, and we go down that line by line and all the rest of it. Now, what happens is, and some some people listening to this podcast will already think risk is a that kind of risk register thing, and that transfer business, that is all a committed thing. We go through it all over and over again. But one thing I see it is that even whatever decision you go on that risk side of it, do we have metrics to postpone every single one of them? So, we give you an example. So if you went through one particular risk, and that could be, I don't know, a phishing email, for example. That phishing email, we'd say, okay, look, we do phishing simulations, we test our workforce, we give them security awareness training, all the rest of it. Great. Guess what? We'll be able to mitigate some of that risk and make it lower. Fantastic. But if it didn't happen, and that phishing simulation led on to a ransomware or a malware being deployed in your organization, how much is that going to cost me? And that's the true reality of it. The metrics driven by cost, by composure, that's going to really drive the board to understand a bit more in terms of clarity.
Oh, that's brilliant. And is there one mistake perhaps that leaders make when demonstrating that? Or is there, something, number one rule that people should be avoiding, for instance?
I think it's our perception piece again, isn't it? We go down to the perception piece because, we always go to the board saying we need X tools and we need to do, these tools are going to help us, go through that breach a bit more clarity. This tool on security awareness will help to teach our workforce to move forward. But the reality is, if we work through that cost element of it and what our mathematics has proved what that would mean financially, that will help the board to understand, okay, do we invest X amount on tools? And I think Jay said at the very beginning, we spend so much money on these tools. But is that the answer to it, or is it the fact that we've put a cost on that breach and we can move forward from that breach? I think it's that part where leaders enhance that perception piece to that part, I think.
I appreciate sharing your perspective. And let's talk about something that nobody wants to admit. It isn't security teams that are perhaps failing. More often than not, it's the board or senior leadership. So can you walk us through the reality of modern security operations?
I think we have to force a conversation with our leaderships, and what that conversation looks like is if there was a breach of a certainty, what does that plausibility and possibility look like, right? And then whilst we go through that, we look at different facets. How is that going to affect my organization financially, operationally, and reputationally? That's something that all three of them may have an implication on your business success. But reputationally, can that business survive amongst other competition that we have? So I think whilst we make sure that leadership accepts that reality, the defining risk appetite, I think they are avoiding that answer realistically. They don't want to answer that question because that means the board have accepted it and they're all for it. They just don't want to do that. So that perception field, where it starts from a leadership especially, goes higher, right to the board. And again, we collide down into this fragile workforce. So I think leaders shouldn't be scared to show vulnerability. Leaders shouldn't be scared to also tell the truth, right? And that reality is very important. And I think we constantly find ourselves at the, I remember as a very early doors CISO, my first CISO role, and I was in front of the board, and they asked me this question. He goes, "What keeps you awake at night?" And I said, "Look, I've just started. I don't know." Because, so what keeps you awake at night, Cam? And just made me think that same thing, even 10 years past that, of a board member telling me that, and I still can't answer it. Why can't I still answer it? And it's, again, am I creating a false persona of myself, or is it I can't face that reality myself. So if I can't answer that as a professional security person for being in the industry for over 10 years or 14 years now, how can I expect leaders to do that as well, right? So I think it's that question that they need to ask themselves over and over again: is this going to be reality? Is this real? And what does that plausibility look like going forward?
That's some great points. And to our audience, if you can answer that question, be sure to drop it in the comments section. And Cam, you've previously spoke about the Where's Wally problem. Vendors keep selling us more AI, more tools, more dashboards. Are we just quietly automating the noise and unfortunately destroying the mental health for our best analysts?
That's a really good question, actually. And I love the Where's Wally analogy because those I do many speaking events where I just put that up on the very beginning of it, and I love it because the room gets quiet for at least 90 seconds to a couple of minutes because they're so concentrated on looking at Where's Wally, right? Unfortunately, us as CISOs, we're looking at every person as a Wally, right? We're looking at that, over 1,000 things in that picture. Every one of those things could be an assumed breach, right? But the audience is looking for that one person, right? So that Wally needs to be right one time and it'll breach the organization. We have to look at every person as a Wally and make sure that every one of those breaches could actually be a problem, right? So I think we're automating noise at scale. That's the best way to put it. And I think more AI, more dashboards, that's great, but does that reduce the risk? I don't think it does. I think it erodes mental resilience. It erodes our way of being human, right? It's a psychological warfare where you see what's in front of you. Dashboards give you a false sense of reality. The reality, I believe, it's not that. I think we're not being individuals. We're eroding our trust. We're eroding our mental resilience. That's going to be the problem child for us. And I said this beginning at this whole mental firewall, human firewall thing. If we're not going to be resilient and we're not providing clarity to ourselves, then we're going to be forcing ourselves making into a wrong decision. And that's the wrong level of perception and confidence that we want to provide our members of staff. We want to actually see what reality looks like and what an assumed breach in reality would come in terms of the scale and speed of that incident.
And look, hypothetically speaking, I'm a tier 1 analyst staring at 10,000 alerts a day. How do you as a leader use automation to help reduce my cognitive overload without, of course, blinding the organization?
I think cognitive overload goes alongside something, well, I feel like it goes alongside a leadership issue and an issue around acceptance. And what I mean by that is saying you've got 10,000 alerts coming yourself, and every one of those 10,000 alerts coming your way could be an assumed breach. Let's face it, the reality is they all will be an assumed breach. I get it. But if we put that 10,000 reality pieces and then add them into other parts that are making that one reality feel plausible that could be an attack vector, then you can see the attack path of that attack working out right to the very end. So it can't be one and only, it can't be a siloed decision. It'd be a decision saying, okay, number one, we've got an alert coming through. Let's add that with this other thing that makes it a bit more susceptible. Let's add that to another thing that I do think that attack path is now coming to fruition, right? So having a tool or a couple of tools may do the work, but remember, the analyst is a person who's going through this all the time. The analyst needs to pick up the phone should they feel that that's going to be an attack that's going to be worked out right to the very end, and that could be a malicious attack coming our way. So we add things together, not work in silos, I think.
it also empowers that particular operator, for instance, to go above and beyond their role and develop their own skill set and pick up some of those scars along the way that, of course, make us stronger and more resilient.
Yeah, and I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. When that person, that analyst, goes over and above their role, that creates a leadership element in themselves. That empowerment in its truest of forms, because that person really has to live by that confidence to say, look, I'm now calling a board member saying, I think this might be a problem. Okay, if it's a problem, are you sure that's going to happen or not? So I think that kind of empowerment, you can't put money on it. I think that, like you said, there are there's scars, and they have to live by those scars, I think.
Now, to our audience, obviously, Cam's outlined the exact reality destroying our industry, the where's Wally problem. And we understand that we are drowning some of the sharpest minds in thousands of meaningful alerts. So to all our listeners that are in the trenches right now, I want you to go to the comment section. Tell me the most ridiculous or soul-crushing alert that you've been chasing over the last week or so. It's taking you away from combating the real threats. Share that in the comment section. Once again, empower others that are out there, and maybe even your SOC manager might pick up on it.
Let's talk a little bit more about the cyber physical convergence side of things, Cam. When digital failure turns into more of a physical crisis. As Director of Security for the NFL, we're not just talking about stolen emails here. We're not talking about, the classic sort of data breaches. We're talking about highly visible, converged cyber physical elements in every sense of the word. So what actually happens when that digital breach, that digital failure threatens the physical safety in a mass-filled stadium of many, many thousands of people?
It's a question that's actually come to more reality for me working in this particular role, if I'll be perfectly honest. And we spend the best part of a year preparing for a game. Everything from a cyber side, physical security, the way the game presents itself, the fan engagement. We spend a whole year to do it. And then when it comes to game day, the nerves are there. From the minute the doors are open, the nerves are there, right? So having an empty stadium where it feels completely surreal, and then you fill that with 60,000 fans or 80,000 fans, it then feels that actually every one of those seats is a security burden on yourself. Every one of those seats is a fan who's come to who's paid to come and watch the NFL play a game. But the safety of that individual is on your shoulders. Now, if we were to then visualize those 80,000 people in those seats, and the scoreboard, that you have a couple of scoreboards, so people who can't see the game very closely, those scoreboards will not only show the score, but the reality is the replays of the live game. If that scoreboard was to be hacked and it said, guess what, there's a bomb under your seat, 80,000 people are going to looking at that screen. They're not looking at the game, and they're concerned for their safety. Now, the stadium may have 20, 30 exit points out of those grounds, out of those stalls, and they all want to do one thing, is leave the stadium, right? And they want to leave the stadium not in a calm, collective fashion, but in absolute chaos. So remember, these exit points are only going to be able to handle 5,000, 6,000 people at any one point in time. What happens when 80,000 people all want to leave out of those exit doors at that time? Is going to cause absolute chaos, right? People are scared for their safety. People want to leave the stadium because they think there's a bomb there. And, you can come into this analogy of having kids, family, old people, disabled people, just general fans getting crushed in this chaos of people leaving. And when you look at it that way, guess what? That was a simple kinetic measure. The cyber side of it, the kinetic measure was the message going on. That led on to actual people leaving at pace when we're not ready for that. So that's just one example, but those examples go on throughout the phase. And, that's never really touched upon me in my previous lines of career. This particular one has given me that reality, I think.
No, absolutely.
I think to add to that as well is that additional impact. Those 80,000 people, for instance, they may have an average of 3 people in their life, and those incidents are going to affect them.
Yeah.
I know I live in Leeds, Jay's over in Manchester, and there were incidents at arenas years ago, and there was chaos that ensued when people were exiting. So there is that physical impact that it gives.
Absolutely, and in this sort of converged environment, what's clearly imperative is crisis governance, and how does that actually change? Who is making the calls when you are shutting down, these systems that create that sort of physical panic?
So we have to be mindful that the people that we call, the people we call in that escalation tree are the right people at the right time. So when it does happen, we pick up the phone or whatever mode of communication it is, and those are the right people who will make a balanced decision. To make a balanced decision, this can't be alone a cyber issue, a physical security issue, or an IT issue. It has to have every individual part of every stakeholder group in that game to make a balanced decision, right? And I think what that does is we're not operating in isolation, we're not operating in silos. We're making a structured, clear authority with no debate at the moment. We have to make, and that provides that level of clarity. Because remember, from a security angle, my thing is quite clear: public safety, right? But from a game operations perspective, a game sustainability perspective, we're looking wider than the game. We're looking about how will that have a knock-on effect on the authority figures, the police, the ambulance, the medical services. How is that going to affect the surrounding area? So we're moving away the problem a bit more from focus on just stadium only and the fan only when that kind of incident happens. We're moving a bit further up. Because remember, the spill out from that will go further than the echo of that noise is going to go further away from the stadium. So making the right people at the right time, but it has to be a unified decision, I think.
And let's talk more about the architecture of survival, assuming the breach. Hypothetically speaking, you've accepted the failures, you know the breach is coming. Walk me through the assumed breach executive playbook. What does that actually look like on paper, Cam?
Sure. No, I think, Warren, the assumed breach, you've already accepted failure as part of that model anyway, right? And once you've accepted that failure, I think the playbook needs to be shown on, moved away from detection, response, and recovery to clear roles, rehearse scenarios, and clear decision making. We need to reduce the chaos, reduce the noise, and eliminating the risk, right? But having clear, concise, individual roles and responsibilities, that will help the decision at the end of it. So we look at the example of the NFL, we do tabletop exercises, right? And we do tabletop exercises in every mode of that point, right? From the very simple thing, a ticket's not scanned, to something like what I touched upon about this scoreboard being hacked. But we'll go further than that, because the reason why we're doing that is really testing ourselves, really stress testing those pinch points. Actually, you know what, that ticket that didn't work, or that ticket that didn't scan, well, that's an easy thing. We'll just fix the ticket machine or the QR code. No, because imagine there's going to be 1,000 people out there who can't get their tickets to work at that time. Remember what I said about that human kinetic issue? We've created that outside the stadium now. And if that's created outside the stadium, we can have pandemonium because people are annoyed, their trust is eroded, and we've moved away from that particular scenario itself to say, actually, this is chaos. So clear, defined roles, and move away from detection and response and really look at the recovery at every one point in time. Let's assume breach. What does that assume breach look like?
Appreciate you sharing. And for our listeners, organisations try to build firewalls, and as you've highlighted, they often neglect leadership composure. And we understand that's obviously a a crucial component. And further to your comments on some of the tabletop exercises, how do organisations perhaps rehearse unified command crisis simulation so the executive team doesn't tear itself apart within the first hour of a ransomware attack, for instance? Are there any practical steps or any tabletops you can share with our audience?
So we do these tabletops to simulate pressure. Like I said before, we simulate the stress test because we're not just looking at scenarios, we're looking at individuals going through that chaos moment in their moment in time. And I touched upon earlier about those split-second decision making. Split-second decision making sometimes is not the right mode of transport that we need. It's not the right mode of clarification and role we need. So we need to put leadership in a situation where when they're constantly making difficult decisions with very incomplete information. If you look at that unified command, the reality is that we have experienced that situation together. We've got different mindsets coming into the room, giving you all types of information. As a leader, you'll bring all that information in your head thinking, okay, now I've got 10, 15 different facets, stakeholders helping us go through this. That's the decision that we're going to perform together. So move away from simulating and being silo driven, but we want to perform together as a team, right? Like I said, if you look at my current scenario, every game is a team. And it's a team. Okay, we have two teams playing the NFL game, absolutely. But within the NFL, we're one team creating that whole unified command together. Let's make that decision together. Moving forward, fingers crossed.
And for our audience, those leaders that perhaps are part of global teams myself, I think one of the challenges that they often face is that and they put these exercises in place, they often talk themselves out of it because the preference is that they want everyone in a physical location to run. But what are the benefits of doing these exercises perhaps virtually with your leadership team versus obviously all being in one room?
I think all being in an environment, more noise, positive, because you'll have 100 different voices and screaming, trying to make a decision. They're not in silos at that moment in time. They're not bringing their own thought to that table. That's the problem. And being a leader when all that's happening is what happens is going to be a positive point or a discussion is very low down that pecking order. Working in a follow the sun incident model or something along those lines, collaborate together, talking about everything to do with that particular incident. That SOC team will work with another team with physical security. They're going to be piling all the public safety and authority things together. Then we'll have operations from a game presentation perspective. So now we've got three bubbles that are talking in their own individual rights, and that one or two feedback decision points are coming to that decision. So I think it doesn't have to be in the same room at any one time. We don't do that. We set bridge on particular reasons because of that only way of reducing that noise. The bridge does do that and define character and clarity on what those decisions look like from each one of those bubbles.
I appreciate you sharing there. Thanks, Cam.
So let's talk a bit more about the Cyber Leaders Summit, upcoming summit in April. You're aware this is a special. When you look at events such as these and the gathering of CISOs and vendors and experts, what, in your opinion, is the collective delusion that everyone in that room is sharing?
Jay, I think that's a fantastic terminology and something I lead in every one of these events. The collective delusion is that we believe more technology equals more security. Creates complete noise The industry is over-engineered and underprepared for reality, and sometimes going on the speaking circuit is kind of setting the scene for those leaders. Is buying X solution on, and remember, some of these panels were made up of solution providers on the panels with us. So you might come to, well, actually, your solution may do X, Y, and Z. That's great, but you're forgetting the human part of it. And I've been in many situations like that where you're not arguing with those individuals and those vendors, but you're just creating a reality where everyone else in the audience is actually thinking. I'm happy to provide that solution, but reality, is it going to make me safety? Is it going to be safer for me or not? So that I went to a gathering of a couple of a couple of 70, 80 CISOs and vendor providers, and on my panel there was 3 leaders and 1 solution provider on the panel, and we were talking about what does it look like for empathy within the workforce, and how do we increase the analogy of clarity, and what does a SOC provide organizations. All of us said the same thing about working under pressure, going through those modes of construct. Go to the final person who's the solution provider, said, "Oh, need to worry about that. AI agents that will do all that for us." You're not answering the question. The question was, how do you provide empathy? And how do you provide empathy to an AI agent? I don't get it. So sometimes challenging the status quo, and it's a good thing. It's healthy, I think. And I'm sure most people go into these thinking the same thing.
Cutting through those agendas, absolutely. Let's say you're on stage. You're now at the Leaders Summit. It's obviously the key things that we love about around 100 individuals with the ability to enact change their respected organisations, and impact society as a whole. You've got 60 seconds to tell the industry what it's getting wrong about human resilience. What do you say?
Stop chasing perfection. Start off with that. Stop chasing perfection. You will be breached. That's going to happen. But invest in your people, your decision making, your ability. Having the investment into people is as a leader, and that builds credibility, that builds trust, and that provides a resilient work, not something that's tumbling and fragile at any one point in time. So technology won't save you, but clarity will, I think.
And for any leaders that are listening that perhaps on their way to the next couple of weeks, what's an uncomfortable conversation they should have with their peers at these events? Or what's one practical piece of advice you'd like to give to those that are attending events such as Cyber Leadership Summit?
I think when gathering those intimate gatherings, I think one thing that they'll always talk about the solutions they have, how the organization providers they work with, which is fantastic. Each to their own, each scenario is different. But I think the one thing that really sparks a conversation, are you truly prepared for the moment? Openly to every other leader to say, are we sitting here today having this prepared? I don't think we are. Most organizations haven't had that conversation honestly. Ask yourself that real simple question. Are we really prepared? I don't think.
So look, as we've said, that resilience is about being unbreakable. It's about how you reboot when the system fails. What's the first thing that any leader do at their own mind, catastrophic failure, which of course everyone likely face at some point in their career?
I think the worst thing you can do in a failure point is react emotionally, and it's very easy to point fingers at that moment. People are not making those decisions. People are breaking. People are not creating that leader to make that decision. So it's very easy at that moment in time to react in those emotional factors, right? And pointing fingers is just not healthy. We just need to make a decision at that moment in time. So I think is slowing down act is very in my head, and the way I was programmed was after an essay, dangerous, not only yourself but others as well, others in the public. And guess what? I am so running at that individual, and I forget about my situational awareness. Right? I don't know any one point in time someone else could hurt me. Right? So moving away from it and being a bit more aware. And that red mist thing, still to this day, and I still teach the problem itself. Let's look at the wider part of the problem. That helps with decision making. And my 10-year-old still doesn't agree with me, but my daughter's getting this.
Take a step back. Absolutely. And look, when everything appears to be broken, networks are down, boards are panicking, the illusion of control is seemingly, gone. What actually matters?
Communication is a key to create a confident workforce, right? If we invest in the people, everything else can come secondary. Because remember, the person could be the fall victim. As a leader, they might be pinpointed saying you caused the issue. There's a breaking point. Help the communication. So invest in the people. The people is going to be your human firewall. I still say this to today. They're going to help you, because it will slow down. It could escalate dramatically, quickly, and we will make the wrong decision as a leader. And I don't think that's a fair place to be.
Good, wise words. Look, it's been a masterclass, Cam. We're listening. We a CISO type of security leader, feeling burnout away from breaking point. What to learn from incredible of their individuals that they feel would benefit from it, and hopefully it might be the exact kind of tonic or mental reboot that they need to survive the week ahead.
And Cam, of course, this conversation is going to force a lot of uncomfortable, necessary changes for some of the leaders listening today. So I do thank you for that. Past the summit, past the current threat landscape, what's next?
The focus building resilience, not locally, consistently, and intelligently. Technology will help, absolutely. You remember, whether you have 1,000 different things going on, AI will help. For me to mention the word AI, people will say every facet all the way through. But moving away from reactive models to more orchestrated models, more predictive models. But we can't the human core. The human decision side can be a friend and foe. Let's invest in that.
Practitioners listening, who want to follow you, your level of thinking beyond obviously the secure CyberConnect community platform. Where's the and your work?
Thank you, Warren. And I think for me, it's very important to kind of have the ability to talk and the way I feel. I think that's really going to help people. And LinkedIn has been my best go-to place. Do all my reflection around step to new students who want to go into cyber. But, I like to share thoughts on resilience, leadership, and the human side of security. I talk about it and I genuinely mean it. So yeah, LinkedIn's my go-to platform.
Time today, it's been an absolute privilege. I'm sure all of our listeners will have found this a hugely beneficial episode. And listen, in terms of stripping away the illusion of control, anybody better who could have delivered a valuable, amazing job.
Thank you, Jay and Warren, for giving me the platform. Really appreciate it.
To a brand new private platform inside the secure CyberConnect ecosystem. We're going to be officially going to war with the £300 billion complexity tax that's in this industry. Field. Firstly, for the professionals in the trenches, if you're a practitioner, 20 hours be ghosted by an algorithm, we're going to be arming you with the professional arsenal. Using our CV market career pathway, intelligent mock interview simulator, and AI studio, you're going to be bypassing the gatekeepers and moving from being an applicant to an authority. Secondly, we know your reality. You're bleeding around £10,000 to £15,000 per technical hire in agency. Your firm's losing every time a senior expert resigns. We're providing you with the tools to create descriptions, both soft and assessments. So no more down in the dark, kissing endless, wasting valuable time. We're going to be fixing that today. Our platform gives to market hub, dedicate that endless tool for hiring, your lead gen, it into one simple engine. We're going to help you freeze authority asset and provide clarity. Whether you're hiring, platform is back. Integrity based on proven technical capabilities, evidence-based trust. It's an enterprise-grade model. It's built best in 2001, trust layer, strictly for people who want to lead through the noise. Check out the OG BER to exclusive early access before we open this to our larger network of around 45,000 security associates and leaders. We'll look forward to seeing you in the trenches, guys. Stay secure.